Is there a writing craft book on your bedside table? Has it been there for a while?
Do you keep meaning to get past chapter 2? Or chapter 1? Or just the first page?
Then the Words to Write By podcast is for you. Hi, I'm Renee. I teach composition and creative writing to college students. My background is in poetry, but I'm working on my memoir.
And I'm Kim. I'm trained as a science journalist, but now I'm trying my hand at short fiction. Each week we'll be tackling a chapter of some well-known, but perhaps not so well-read, writing craft book.
Together, we'll uncover brilliant insights, face the hard truths, and totally disagree when the author is wrong.
This is our podcast, after all.
And then, we're going to take what we learn and apply it to our own writing.
By doing the book's suggested exercises.
We're inviting you to read along, or just tune in for the Cliff Notes version.
We're committed to improving our own craft, one writing advice book at a time, and we'd love for you to join us. Hi listeners, Kim here. We have another interview from the 2022 San Francisco Writers Conference, this time with Susan Tunnis, proprietor of Bookshop West Portal. Every year at the conference, they bring a large selection, we're talking over 5 tables worth, of writing craft books. It's very tempting.
How many books do you sell at one of these things?
Oh gosh, that is a question I am not prepared to answer because we just don't quantify it that way. The short answer is we sell a good number. People come here and it's like being a kid in a candy shop because when do you ever see this many craft books in one place? Someone came up yesterday and said, "Is your bookstore all about writing?" And I said, "No, we just do this for the Writers Conference."
What is the typical person that buys a craft book? Do they buy a bunch of them? Or what's
Oftentimes they will. They'll walk out with a stack of 5 or 6. A lot of times they've never even seen the books. We've been doing this for years, and so we pay a lot of attention to what is new, what's coming out, and we also have a good knowledge of the perennial bestsellers and the classics that build up any good craft library.
Give me an example of a perennial bestseller.
Okay, I would say possibly number 1 would be Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. It's just one of those books that I think is sort of foundational and people want to have it in their library. But another really big one, and it may be counterintuitive, Stephen King's On Writing, which is a superlative book on the craft and I think has a lot to offer for people who are not necessarily interested in the horror genre. This is a guy who's sold a lot of books and he has acquired knowledge over the years.
If you had a technical writing book that people like, which one would you say?
You know, in that case, there isn't necessarily a single one that stands out, but, I mean, you've got Elements of Style, which again is like, it's the basic. And I guess that's not even a technical writing book. I'm looking. And I'm sorry, I'm disappointing you, but there's not one single book that I'm going to say is the book. There are many, and some of the ones that I'm thinking of are not on the table because I've already sold them.
Excellent. And then as far as like a new one, like what's the new hot craft book?
Okay, I'm going to be super cheesy right now, and I'm going to take you all the way down to the end of the table because one of our keynote speakers this weekend is Charlie Jane Anders. Now, I'm going to be impolitic and say I don't like the title of this book, which is Never Say You Can't Survive, How to Get Through Hard Times by Making Up Stories. I don't like that title because it sounds like some kind of self-help book. This is a tremendous book on craft. I read it this week, and I was blown away because, firstly, her voice comes through. It shines through. She's got a heart that's as big as the sky. She's got endless empathy, but she also has solid tips on craft and also on getting yourself into the right mindset. She's got some writing exercises and prompts in here. Just about any writer can get something from this book. I would say that any writer of fiction can get a lot from this book, and any writer of speculative fiction has won the jackpot. But I'm not even a writer, and I got a tremendous amount just from reading this book.
Okay, I have to admit, I think I'm going to buy this book.
It's an awesome book. And there are new fantastic books literally coming out every season. So it's good to keep abreast of them. And it's exciting because every writer has different things that work for them. the reason why everyone needs so many books in their library is it's not one size fits all, and different people will be inspired and different people have different styles of working. It probably takes a lot of experimentation until you find what works for you.
So in other words, buying craft books, reading the first chapter, deciding it's not for us, and going out and buying other craft books is actually part of the process of finding the right craft book for us?
Well, yes, except I would argue that you stop after reading the first chapter because, okay, admission time, I'm one of those people that never quits a book because I'm always convinced it will redeem itself by the end. Mm-hmm. And occasionally it does. You could say that I'm a cockeyed optimist, but I feel like if you read the whole book, that maybe there would be some wonderful things that were not in the first chapter. Mm-hmm. You're also allowed to browse in the bookstore. You can read the first chapter in the bookstore. In fact, I don't know where your listeners are, but if they're in San Francisco, and even if they're not attending the conference, they can come here and shop at the bookstore that we have at the conference every year. They're allowed to come.
And do you guys have a brick and mortar store?
We do. We are Bookshop West Portal, and we are in the West Portal neighborhood of San Francisco on West Portal Avenue. We are 1 block from the Muni, so we're super easy to get to, and we are a sort of generalist bookstore. We're in this adorable neighborhood. We're in this little cottage of a bookshop that's so charming, it'll give you saccharin.
You don't have a cat, do you?
We don't have a cat. We used to have dogs. We were a dog shop. It's just a lovely place to be. We don't specialize in books on writing, and we don't have all of these books in the store all year round. We curate this collection specifically for the conference, and we always have some books and probably a little better selection than the average store of our size, but not all of these.
So if you're in San Francisco and the San Francisco Writer Conference is going on, you can just come by here and shop for books on crafts.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I did, in fact, buy 2 craft books that day, including the one recommended. Okay, on with the podcast. In this episode, we dive into scenes, which according to Jack Bickham in his book Scene and Structure are the building blocks of all stories and are themselves constructed out of a stated goal, an evolving argument, and a disaster. We examine each of these elements and then turn to some real book examples to see if they follow these rules.
So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We are now on chapter 4.
We are going much slower given the short chapters in this book.
They are packed with stuff.
They are. When you're doing Gardner, I felt perfectly fine just skipping over a whole bunch of his
pontificating.
But here, there's a lot behind each of these points, which I agree and sometimes in case disagree with.
It's hard for me to disagree because I haven't yet studied examples too closely, which we are going to do in this episode. I'm not sure, should we trust him? He's very authoritative.
He is. I feel like in physics class where they would simplify stuff down to the point that it was able to be taught and you're able to do problems with it and you're able to fit it all together. But that was because they took away so many different variables. An example would be like there's the whole fluid dynamic motion of air over the wing of an airplane. And they have this picture of it carved out, and you see how it's rounded on one side and it comes down on the other side. And they show how the pattern, how the lift comes up under the airplane's wing. And it all makes perfect sense. Except then you remember planes can also fly upside down. So how does that work? And I'm kind of feeling like that's what this book is about. This book tells you all the things that makes like a plane actually fly in the air, but then planes also can do these other things.
Do you think maybe he gets into that stuff later? Or do you think this guy's like a one-trick pony?
I'm thinking he's just going to go really strong on this idea. But maybe there'll be a book at the end, chapter at the end saying, and now here's how you do it differently.
It's interesting how these books, there's an agenda/argument that the authors in these craft books are trying to hold down. It's weird. They have an image in their head, and that's one of the features of a craft book, at least the 3 we've read so far. Even Bradbury
had a way that it worked for him.
Yeah. Okay, this chapter is called Structure and Larger Elements, The Scene. And we have talked about the scene before in our episode Interest in Truth on Gardner. And you can get that on our website. And on the web, we actually quoted Gardner's definition of scene. It even says, Renee particularly liked Gardner's definition of scene. Past Renee was really happy with this one. So Gardner says, by scene we mean here all that is included in an unbroken flow of action from one incident in time to another. The action within a scene is unbroken in the sense that it does not include a major time lapse or a leap from one setting to another, though the character may, of course, walk or ride from one place to another without breaking the scene, the camera, so to speak, dollying after them. The action within a scene need not be unbroken in the sense that it includes flashbacks or brief authorial interruptions for background explanation. The scene is not broken, in other words, when a character's mind drifts from present surrounding to some earlier scene, which is then vividly set before us for the time the flashback lasts. I can't believe I thought that was a good definition of a scene.
It was so much clearer than everything else you wrote.
I guess.
Let's contrast that with what Bickham says.
So this is what Bickham says. What is a scene? It's a segment of story action, written moment by moment, without summary, presented on stage in the story now. It is not something that goes inside a character's head. It is physical. It could be put on the theater stage and acted out.
So there's some similarities.
He says it is moment by moment, and Gardner says it's unbroken.
So in both cases, there's definitely a moment of time and a location. Doesn't jump around.
Right.
That helps you locate a scene in a book if you're trying to find, well, where does the scene start and stop? It starts at one period of time and it moves to on the characters the whole time, and then you have a cut, usually like an actual break, but sometimes just a transition paragraph to some other location. Then you've ended the scene. But what's really important here is what he says is in a scene.
Right. And what's in the scene, he's got it, of course, in Bickham style, bullet pointed. There needs to be these three things. It's the scene pattern. There needs to be 1, a statement of goal, introduction and development of conflict, and failure of the character to reach his goal, a tactical disaster.
Okay, let's break that down, starting with a goal.
So the goal kind of eludes me. I did not realize, I guess as a reader, we just don't realize certain things, that a character is announcing a goal in the beginning of a scene. Did you realize that?
Well, I didn't take it as a character announcing, but that you made it clear to the readers. You stated to the readers what was at stake.
Oh.
But the most convenient thing is for the character. In this case, we have our lovely Fred who's got a mountain to climb and very much would be the type to say, I'm going to the bank to get that loan.
Right. Let's talk about what he talks about with goals. And he's talked about goals earlier in a previous chapter, but it didn't seem as important, but now he's really going to town on it. So we just want to make it clear. He says, the prototypical scene begins with the most important character walking into a situation with a definite, clear-cut, specific goal, which appears to be immediately attainable. This goal represents an important step in the character's game plan, something to be obtained or achieved, which will move him one big step closer to attainment of his major story goal. So it's like a mini goal that gets him closer to his big story goal.
Right. You know, if someone's played a video game, you don't go and fight the big boss at once. You start with the small ones and you collect the various items and you do all those little steps to work together.
You fetch all the apples for the NPC, and then you fetch all the monster guts for the other NPC, and then it gets harder from there.
He's got this whole idea of building blocks, and each of the scenes adds together. So each one has to have its own goal. You can't just have someone wandering around doing nothing in a scene.
So there's a story goal, but then there's the scene goal. So obviously the story goal is the overarching goal of the whole story, and the scene goal is just specifically the character's goal in that scene. The story goal here is, I must be first to climb that mountain, Fred said. And the reader's story question is, will Fred succeed in being first to climb the mountain? But later, one of his goals is to get some money to fund his expedition.
Okay, so this is the goal of the story. This is the question. Will Fred climb the mountain? But if you just have him go climb the mountain right away, this is that whole where to start your story. If you start at the point where he's climbing the mountain and he finishes climbing the mountain, you could be done with your story in 5 pages.
Right. If Cinderella got the slipper in the beginning, it'd be dumb.
Right. So the way that we are invested as readers in it is that we have to be invested in each of those individual goals. Maybe not to the same extent that we are in the overall, is he going to climb the mountain first, but enough so that we're turning the pages. And I actually wanted to bring up something we were commenting on earlier about whether or not these rules that he lays out apply to commercial fiction versus literary fiction. I think that these goals are essential for page-turning fiction. Anytime you have a book where someone wants to turn the next page, that's what this teaches you to do.
Like Andy Weir. I don't know if you guys read Hail Mary, but man, that was a page turner.
Right. Some deeply emotional things can be page turners too.
That's true. The Blue House. I was a really big fan of that one. That was a page turner. One other thing I thought was interesting, which was really helpful for me. I've tried writing a couple of novels. One I did finish, which I will never see the light of day. And then the other one I just kind of abandoned. And one big issue I was having as I was writing is I felt like they were just talking heads. Like in a scene, I was just trying to relay information.
Right.
And he actually kind of addresses this problem. The conflict in a scene has to be developed and it has to move somewhere, which creates a forward momentum in the story. So by including the goal and working through the conflict, it's creating that momentum. So I was using scenes to get information across. I wasn't using them in the proper way.
Scenes do need to get information across, but that's not what's going to cause your reader to keep reading or turning the pages. What that causes the momentum is that conflict. And the conflict needs to be the conflict related to that goal, that stated goal. It can't be, I'm going to see if I have all the ingredients to make a sandwich, and then there's an earthquake that hits the house.
Right. That is unsatisfying for the reader.
Or that, obviously, that's not the goal that's causing the readers to move through about that sandwich that I was going to make. And I think in the next chapter, he's going to talk a little bit more about like fine tuning. But for right now, we're just saying that your goal in the case of the book, he talks about Fred's going to go get a bank loan to finance his climbing the mountain. So the question of the scene is Fred going to get the bank loan? The conflict has to be with the loans officer and Fred going back and forth. So critical to the conflict, we alluded to this, is there needs to be a villain or somebody countering what your character wants to do. When you were talking about you having this dialogue that was just information dumps, the problem was that you can include that information, but fundamentally, your dialogue is conflict.
Right. They have to be fighting over something. Yes, they can deliver information to each other for the reader, but they need to be having a conflict between each other. It's a power play. There has to be some kind of power play between two or more characters.
Right. Bickham's saying, make it a power play, make it a direct conflict. Character A wants this, character B doesn't want to give it to them. However, more sophisticated writers will have other conflicts where maybe it's not quite being said. Or maybe you have someone who's really, really helpful but doesn't have a clue what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be exactly a head-to-head confrontation. However, to learn the principles, you start with a head-to-head conflict.
So he has a line in here. I actually kind of want to put this on a t-shirt. Readers enjoy watching the antagonist punch and counterpunch. They love sweating bullets with the hero as he struggles for the upper hand. They get their excitement in the scenes. They like to live them in their imagination.
That's a lot for a t-shirt, Renee.
Oh, no, I haven't gotten there yet. So the most important way you attain this end is by presenting each scene moment by moment. Verisimilitude, leaving nothing out because there is no summary in real life. I want that on a t-shirt.
There is no summary in real life.
There is no summary in real life. I don't know why I like that line. That's weird, though, because he talked about how fiction doesn't work as real life earlier on. And now he's saying, but no, summary, it's like, okay, dude.
Renee, are you being a smart-ass student here in the back of the room?
I'm being a smartass?
Excuse me, but didn't you say this didn't apply in real life?
Yes, I was that student. But we all know I was that student. If you've read my show notes, you know I was that student. I don't know. Do you agree? Is there no summary?
Maybe you have summaries in between your scenes, but both Bickham and Gardner agree that a scene happens in the moment. Starts at this time and location, and it ends at this time and location, and there might be some internalization, but there's no summary at that point.
So, do you also agree that there is a conflict in every scene? Like there's a power play between one or more characters or the protagonist and something else. Every scene has that.
I think that every dialogue should have some kind of conflict, because why else would you be having it? Why else would you have a conversation with someone where you agree completely with them and you just hear them agreeing with each other? Think about when you're in a presentation and basically people are trying to say, yes, I agree. And let's have this person out who's really been helping out a lot. And I agree they do this. Oh, but you did this. But it gets long.
Old. Okay, so this reminds me of my students and when I'm teaching English 1A, which is really weird because when I'm reading this book, the way it's written, it makes me feel like I'm in a lecture almost. And this stuff could easily be transferred over to PowerPoint presentation. And I have a lesson about argument where students can't just say yes or no in an argument. And I actually play this in my class. I don't know if anyone's seen Monty Python's Argument Clinic sketch, but all it is yes it is, no it isn't, yes it is, no it isn't. Like it's just two people saying yes, no to each other. And that's not an argument.
Oh, it's totally an argument. It's just not something we want to read.
Yes, it's not something that you can argue in an academic essay. And it looks like it's not something that you can even do in a story because it's just boring and it doesn't go anywhere. And what I tell students, a proper argument is one that evolves. You know, somebody has to switch gears and go, all right, well, you might be right about that, but what about this other point you made? You have to keep it going in some way. Because the argument never really ends until you've officially out-argued somebody, which never really happens.
Or someone throws something at you. But basically,
True.
This is critical. I wrote in my notes. Circular non-development of conflict in stories is, capital letters, awful. And there's nothing more irritating than to watch the hero that's just had this discussion with something and made clear, and then he goes to the next spot and has the exact same argument. It's like, come on, guy.
Right.
Or gal. Like, it's clear. This guy is no good for you. Everyone's explained it to you. Anything that makes you want to throw the book across the room is probably a bad argument.
Yeah. Essentially, it's when you're yelling at the TV.
Right.
Your scene doesn't have the correct elements that it needs to evolve.
And the great thing about evolving an argument is that that's when you can work in character, you can work in some background information, you can bring up some points someone didn't know. That all goes into it, but it's not the primary momentum of the story. The momentum is the argument. Everything else, all the supporting bits, help the reader understand better, but they're turning the pages to find out how the argument goes.
Or the conflict, you mean?
Or the conflict goes, yeah.
Okay.
Because you can have a conflict also with nature or something beyond the character, as long as it's external.
Yeah, if you remember from high school, you know, and they broke it down, character versus character, character versus nature, character versus themselves.
But that's the thing. The character versus themselves, according to Bickham, is not allowed.
Sort of, because he says that the conflict has to be external. So it has to manifest externally, which makes sense. You know, you could have one like, what was it, Girl Interrupted? Wasn't she having kind of a conflict within herself, but she was in a psych unit?
The idea is the scene itself takes place in the real world, in a real location, with a real period of time, and all that has to be playing out. And maybe there's something going on in the back of the character's mind while these things are happening. But this is the classic where you're reading amateur writing or fan fiction, and you've got 4 pages of Harry Potter thinking to himself. First of all, Harry Potter was never that deep. But also, even if it was Hermione, that's not a scene. Even though, as readers, we often will think long and hard about a really interesting character and what's going on in their head. But to write a scene, there has to be external things happening the whole time. And then you weave in that internal discussion.
Right.
But it can't be the scene.
It cannot be the scene.
So then all this builds up to the ending, or as Bickham likes to say, the disaster.
The tactical disaster.
The disaster is the character not getting what they want. Does Fred get the loan? The answer is no, because if Fred gets the loan, then it's too easy. And that's, again, chapter 5 we'll go talk about next time. But assume for now that Fred can't get the goal.
And not only, he says, not only can he not get the goal, but he must leave in worse shape than he was in when he went in. Anytime you can build a scene which leaves your character in worse shape, you have probably, quote, made progress in terms of your story's development. Which is weird because it's like walking up a sand dune, right? You take a step forward and you go half a step back.
Right.
But he's got a formula for this.
He has different ways of saying no, different levels of no. So it's no, yes, but, and then no, but furthermore.
And furthermore.
And furthermore. I wrote down no, absolutely not.
Well, so here's the thing. No, that one's iffy, right? Like, you got to be careful because you don't want to have that yes, no thing.
Right. In this case, Fred simply does not get the loan and he leaves dejected and he has to come up with some other way to make the money.
Right. But it makes it more interesting if the end disaster, the tactical disaster, is either a no and furthermore or a yes but disaster. So if it was no and furthermore, you'd say, no, he doesn't get the loan
and when they're going through his records, discover that he's late on a whole bunch of payments. So now the bank's going to foreclose on his house.
Bam.
That's when the scene's really that much worse. Or the and but, that's the walking through the sand. That's the stepping up and getting 1 foot up, but falling back. So yes, but to make it interesting, there's a moral dilemma. Yes, we'll give you the loan, but you're going to have to put another person's house on the line, like your mother's house, as collateral. Suddenly there's a moral dilemma.
Right. Or whatever dilemma. And this is interesting. Like, the light went on in my head when I was reading this. I was like, this is how stories go forward. And this is how stakes keep getting higher and higher and higher because you keep piling on this shit on the poor protagonist. Man, we really are mean to our protagonists.
I think this is most physically obvious in action-adventure films because they're constantly in more danger, even as they move forward to stop the terrorists.
You know what utilizes this to the T? Like, exactly. Breaking Bad. Did you ever watch Breaking Bad?
I watched the first season.
At the end of every episode, it has a yes, but, or a no, and disaster. Yes, Jesse Pinkman finds a girlfriend. Some kind of person that's not Walter White, who's super toxic and mean. But she's a junkie.
Right.
And Walter White kills her. I'm telling you, watch Breaking Bad and notice how this plays out every single time.
Or if emotionally you're not up for handling that, you can get some of the old Faulty Tower episodes because inevitably every scene of that, Basil Fawlty does something to make things worse and worse and worse and worse. So that's a more lighthearted version, but still very cringeworthy.
Yeah.
But here's a little bit of devil's advocate. The fact is that not all scenes in your book end in a and, but, no, absolutely not. There are successes the character makes.
But that's what the yes is.
I see. So, yes, and then you're dangling something that doesn't make it all. But it's not always that obvious. Yes, you may have this loan, but you need to do this other thing. Sometimes it's, yes, it all works out with the car they've just repaired, but as they drive off, you see a critical bolt they forgot to put in lying on the side.
Right.
It's that little dangling bit as they go off to know that, no, it's not all perfectly right.
Right.
So from the character's perspective, even, it could feel like it's all going right.
Yeah. The reader is in on something that the protagonist is not.
sometimes things do have to go right in the story, so things can go horribly wrong later on.
But again, that is yes, but. Yes, this went really well, but later on in the story. But no, I guess he's talking about a scene here. He's not talking about the end of the story. He's talking about just the scene.
What I got out of this is that while the goal, conflict, and disaster are critical elements for the writer to know, sometimes you can be a little bit more nebulous in what you tell your audience. Sometimes the yes but isn't explicitly stated, but you as the writer know there's a but. You should never write your scene without knowing what a goal is. You should never write your scene without having a conflict that goes through it. You should never write your scene without knowing what negative impact is also going to happen at the end of that scene, even if nobody else knows it.
So this is interesting. I am suspending my belief here because I know that that's true. You need to know as the writer, is this a yes but, is this a no and, or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, like, I need to see a scene. I need to see a scene and I need to see if it plays out or not because I can't quite envision it. I honestly just can't think of an example offhand.
And fortunately, we have some books here.
We're going to give Bickham the benefit of the doubt here because he's writing commercial fiction, right? Page turners, as we said. And so I picked one off the shelf, and the one I picked is Red Shirts by John Scalzi. I opened up a random page, looked for the beginning of a scene. I have no idea what I'm about to get into. All right. Page 119. Where's Maya? Krenensky asked. Who? Fenn said innocently. Duval, Krenensky said somewhat impatiently. She's supposed to be on this away team. Oh, her, Fenn said. She's been Wayland with Oryxian dropsy. She's out for a couple of days. Dollhair and I are replacing her on the team. Check your orders, sir. Kerensky looked at Finn appraisingly, then pulled out his phone and checked the away team order. After a moment, he grunted and motioned them toward the shuttle. Finn and Doll got on. That's it. I mean, really.
So my question was, they were going to start off with, where's
Maya?
Yeah, so is Maya going to appear or not?
Yes.
If that's the question, the answer is the scene is already finished.
Yeah. It continues on, and then he says, several minutes later, with Krenensky at the controls, the shuttle was out of its bay and headed towards the Nantes.
Okay, so I'd say actually that was your scene.
That was it.
So the question was, actually this is kind of cute, is Maya going to be there? And the answer is no. And it starts off with him having the conflict. Well, who is this person? Well, it's this person here. Oh, well, this person is, as opposed to if he had said, where's Maya? Oh, she's away with so-and-so. She won't be here.
Right.
But instead, it is phrased as a conflict.
That's true. It is
a very micro conflict, but still.
And there is also a story goal. Where is Maya?
Right.
He's looking for her, and he can't find her.
And it's a no. No, he's not going to find her.
Right. No, and the guy doesn't even know who he's talking about.
Right. So that's the built-in conflict. That's the difference between having it just be a data dump.
Oh, wow. It is true. What? One more.
Okay, let's try again.
Page 92. Slow down, Andy, Duval said, moving faster herself to keep up. You just got out of sick bay. Doll snorted and stomped down the corridor. Duval came up even to him. You think she got you assigned to the bridge to get back at you for your lab mate, she said. No, Doll said. She got me assigned to the bridge because when she had to assign Jake and Fiona, it rubbed her face in it. In it, Duval said. In what? Doll glanced at Duval. That she's afraid, he said. Everyone on this ship is afraid, Maya. They hide and they disappear and they find ways to not think about how much time they spend hiding. And then comes the moment when they can't hide and they have to face themselves, and they hate that. That's why Collins assigned me to the bridge, because otherwise, every time she looked at me, she'd be reminded that she's a coward. He sped up again. Where are you going? Duval asked. Leave me alone, Maya, Doll said. Duval stopped in her tracks. Doll left her behind.
It definitely demonstrates the conflict and the escalation and also the evolution of the conflict. Because it starts off with, what's the first bit?
She says, slow down, Andy. And he says, no.
Okay, so that's the first bit, the no. He's not going to slow down. They're talking first about slowing down, and we end with this
metaphysical, like everyone's afraid and I know this person's a coward.
Well, it seems like you've got two. You've got the physical, but then you've got the philosophical. You've got the slow down Andy. He just got out of sick bay. He is literally speeding up, but also his brain is speeding up. He's getting angry.
We're starting off with one conflict and then it's evolving.
Oh, I see.
He started with a very physical scene. The guy's leaving sick bay. Slow down. No. And that no instigates the whole conflict dialogue, which ends in this very profound statement.
She also brings it up too. She had the goal. She said, slow down. He said no. It went to the philosophical place, but then she said, where are you going? Which is bringing it back to slow down. Okay, where are you going? Like she's still trying to get him to stop.
It's keeping it in the here and now, step by step.
I get it. It's the physical. They're keeping it in the physical world for the reader to see it. But the internal stuff is still physical because he's saying it out loud. Okay, well, this is a commercial fiction. Good job, John Scalzi. Bickham would be proud. So what do you got there, Kim?
So I have The House of Many Ways by Diana Wynne Jones.
What kind of genre is that? I've never seen that book
fantasy.
before.
This is actually the sequel to Howl's Moving Castle.
Oh, is this young adult fiction?
Oh, yeah, she did it for young adult.
Okay.
When Charmaine woke, she discovered the waif had planted her vast head on the bed across Charmaine's leg. Charmaine with difficulty dragged her legs out from under Waif's head and edged around Waif's vast body, finding clean clothes, getting into them. When she came to do her hair, Charmaine discovered that all the hairpins she usually put up with seemed to have vanished, probably during her dive off the cliff. All she had left was a ribbon. Mother always insisted that respectable girls need to have their hair in a neat knot on the top of their head. Charmaine had never worn her hair any other way. Oh, well, she said, looking at her reflection in the neat little mirror. Mother's not here, is she? And she did her hair in a flat plait for one shoulder and fastened it with the ribbons. Just like that, she thought her reflection looked nicer than usual, fuller in the face and less thin and grumpy. She nodded at her reflection, picked her way around Waif to get to the bathroom. Okay, so here's my scene. I'm going to say it starts with Charmaine discovered that all her hairpins she usually put up with seemed to have vanished. So the question is, will Charmaine find her hairpins?
This is such a weird plot. Okay, go on. What a weird story goal.
Well, this is the scene goal. This is the scene.
The scene
will
goal.
Charmaine find her hairpins?
Charmaine versus hairpins.
Right. And then we bring in her memories of her mother always insisting that respectable girls need to have their hairpins. So, that's a conflict there. And then...
Okay, the conflict
so
I see is manifested in the missing hair.
So this is more internal here. Like, she's kind of remembering what her mother would say about these things. And then oh, well, mother's not here, is she? And she does her hair a different way.
So that's interesting. No, but this is in a positive way, right? Well, I think it is. No, she could not find the pins, and she now thinks she looks better, and it's a riff against mom. Like, I don't need mom here. I look good without this stuff.
Right.
She's growing up.
Right. Well, there's a goal. It's not Charmaine was looking for her hairpins. She couldn't find them. It was Charmaine discovered that all her hairpins she usually had vanished. So it's not directly said, but it's obvious that the goal is to find the hairpins. And then the conflict with what her mother would say that she would do and what her hair would do. And then there's
just like the argument in a scene, the character has to evolve in terms of the conflict. So instead of finding the hairpins, she evolved and was like, hey, I look good without them. I'm excited because I'm seeing it in the real world. It's one thing to get theoretical. It's kind of like if a teacher reads out of a textbook. That is not really that helpful if you can't apply it to something right away. My brain is just going to go nowhere and wait for the example. At least this is what happens when we read board game rules. I can't handle it. I've got to just start playing.
You had one other book.
I thought I would pick up a memoir book to see if that does it too. And I decided to pick one of the commercial ones that I have. It's called Wild, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail by Cheryl Strayed. Honestly, if this isn't commercial memoir, I don't know what is. Opening up to a random page, I'm going to start on page 73. "What kind of woman are you?" Frank asked when he was done with his work and he'd climbed into the truck beside me. "What kind?" I asked. Our eyes locked and something in his unveiled itself, and I looked away. "Are you like Jane? Like the kind of woman Tarzan would like?" "I guess so," I said and laughed, though I felt a creeping anxiety wishing that Frank would start the truck and drive. He was a big man, rangy and chiseled and tan, a miner who looked to me like a cowboy. His hands reminded me of all the hands of the men I'd known growing up. Men who worked their bodies for a living, men whose hands would never get clean no matter how hard they scrubbed. As I sat there with him, I felt the way I always do when alone in certain circumstances with certain men, that anything could happen, that he could go about his business mannerly and kind, or he could grab me and change the course of things entirely in an instant. With Frank in his truck, I watched his hands, his every move, each cell in my body on high alert, though I appeared as relaxed as if I'd just woken from a nap. "I've got a little something for us," he said, reaching into the glove compartment to remove the flask of whiskey. "It's my reward for a hard day's work." He unscrewed the cap and handed it to me. "Ladies first." I took it from him and held it to my lips and let the whiskey wash into my mouth. "Yep, that's the kind of woman you are. That's what I'm going to call you, Jane." He took the flask from me and had a long drink. "You know, I'm not actually out here completely alone," I blurted, making up the lie as I spoke. "My husband, his name is Paul, he's also hiking. He started at Kennedy Meadows. Do you know where that is?" We each wanted the experience of hiking alone, so he's hiking south and I'm hiking north, and we're meeting in the middle, and then we'll go to the rest of the summer together. Frank nodded and took another sip from the flask. "Well, then he's crazier than you," he said. "After thinking about it for a while, it's one thing to be a woman crazy enough to do what you're doing. Another thing to be a man letting his wife go off and do this." It goes on. I don't know if you want me to finish.
What do you think the goal?
The goal is pretty much, Margaret Atwood aptly said, "Men are afraid, women will laugh at them. Women are afraid, men will kill them."
So her goal is not to get killed?
Well, she's not sure where she is. She's not sure who this guy is. Is this guy a nice guy? So her goal is to figure out, is she in danger or not? It's to protect herself.
Okay, so is she in danger or not is the question. Or if you want to do a yes or no. Is Cheryl in danger with this man?
Right. Looks like she's in the car with him. She is hiking the Pacific Crest Trail alone. That's part of the plot of the story.
Right. But this actual scene is she is in a car alone with a man. And the question is she in danger?
Is she in danger? Yes. But she seems kind of in a social trap with this guy, in a literal trap in his car.
So then the conflict would have to be directly related to that goal.
Right. And so far it's looking like he is dangerous. I mean, he pulls out whiskey. He says that she's the type of woman that she is, which is kind of creepy for a woman to hear that.
So yeah, all the dialogue and her observations of stuff are to say, is this man dangerous? And the answer is yes.
Probably, yeah. You know, I gotta say this was expertly done, even though we didn't necessarily finish the scene because it goes on in quite a ways. The tension in me, maybe just being a woman, is like, oh shit. I think we've all been here one way or another. So here at the very end, just the very, very end, it says, Frank reached under the seat where the gun resided in its little black case. He came up with a clear plastic bag. Inside, there were long, thin ropes of red licorice, each bunch wound like a lasso. He held the bag out to me and asked, "You want some, Miss Jane?" Ooh. So it's no, she might not be in danger, but it's still not sure. I mean, he didn't pull the gun on her.
No. It was a bit of a fake out right there, at least at this stage.
But also she called it a lasso, right? So metaphorically, it was kind of like he had tied her.
You thought it was rope being described, zip ties being described as licorice, but in fact, it was licorice.
Yes. So even in memoir, it does it. But, you know, the examples that Bickham gives are so cookie cutter. But in a novel, they're not.
They're so bad. But
yeah, so it's like This is where craft comes in. You have to think about things more than just being black and white. Look, I have all three of these things. You know, you have to like really think about it and deliver your story goal.
Or rather, if you're too obvious about it,
Yeah.
no one's going to run you to read your story. But apparently, you don't have to be like, but my story is more sophisticated than that. So it's not going to have these elements because, you know, I want to write a real story that's just going to move people wonderfully and they don't follow these, you know, cookie cutter rules. And yet,
They do.
they do. They definitely
Right.
play around with them, but
It's not magic. Just because you have a story goal and you have a conflict and you have a tactical disaster does not mean you have a effective scene. It's not magic, but you need those things for the scene to be effective. Maybe.
I think that if you just do a scene that has a stated goal, a conflict that changes over the course, and a disaster where the person doesn't get what they want,
Or they do, but with a caveat.
yeah, then if it was only that, I would probably be very bored and not that interested in turning the page. But if you were to rewrite it a couple of times and maybe make it a bit more subtle or add some other things or weave some stuff in, I would turn the page, and it wouldn't be because of the stuff you added in. It would still be because of that underlying structure you put into the scene.
Right.
So I think what this is saying is it doesn't have to be obvious that you're following this format, but you need to have this format.
Right. It's just like he said, maybe chapter 1, right? It's the parts of the house that make it a house. The house could look totally weird, but it still has to have the foundation and it still has to have doors and windows.
And I was rather surprised. I actually thought when you're looking in those books that we'd find that they didn't agree at all. I really kind of was thinking that we wouldn't find a Fred asks the bank manager for a loan scene, but they kind of all did.
They did, not so obviously. Well, yours was really pushing a boundary. I mean, we could be reading into it too deeply, but yeah, I think I saw them in there personally.
Okay, so what is going to be our exercise this week?
Okay, so at the very end, he says, if you have not been writing with full awareness of scene structure, let me urge you to practice planning a number of scenes strictly as an exercise. Always start with a goal, plan your conflict, and devise a solid disaster. If you can't quickly come up with a list of possible scene goals of your own, you might want to try the following, in each case writing at least 3 paragraphs outlining the nature of the opposition and some of the key steps in the conflict, and then specifying a good disaster that might usefully end that scene.
I don't think we need to go through the list, but there are some options here,
Yes.
and I think we'll either choose one of these options or
Or revise one of our scenes.
yeah, I think if we could revise a scene, that might be the best. But on the other hand, these would be shorter.
Right. But it is nice to have choices, right?
We're each going to either pick one of these examples or write our own. Let's see how this goes.
Is this the right one for an argument?
I've told you once.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have.
When?
Just now.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
I did.
Didn't.
I'm telling you I did.
You did not.
Oh, I'm sorry, is this a 5-minute argument or the full half hour?
Oh, just the 5-minute one.
And we're back with our activity for the podcast.
This week, we are going to do Renee's piece. If you've been listening to our Patreon account, you're actually familiar with the story of Renee's encounter with some very badly behaved dogs. But if not, it's a treat for you. This is like the 3rd version you've written because you've changed it each time to fit the assignments.
Yeah, this is a scene from my memoir. It's the very ending of a chapter about the relationship between me and my mom and a dog that we own named Damsel.
Do you want to start by reading it?
So in this scene, I am walking my dog Damsel on our block, and we lived on a country road. At the end of our driveway, we turned down the road toward the cattle bridge. A German Shepherd, a mutt, and a pit bull lounged unsupervised and unleashed in the neighbor's driveway. These 3, I suspected, were the reason we only had 1 cat left, and why our other 2, Puck and One-Eye Jack, never came home. Come on, girl, just ignore them. Let's go, I said more to myself than Damsel, and left our gravel driveway. We didn't make it more than a foot past their driveway. The dogs lifted their bodies at the same moment, as if telepathically linked, and approached low and in unison. Damsel stopped pulling, the leash slack in my hand. She did not crouch down or snarl, but instead posed still, her paws weighted to the asphalt like some kind of show dog being examined on a table, legs straight, head raised, tongue no longer wagging from her mouth. Damsel, like me, only grew up with cats. Damsel, like me, had yet to learn the ways of her own kind. I wanted to tug on the leash, but I was afraid Damsel would turn her back on them. I did not know the ways of dogs, but I'd seen this before. I knew bullies, and I knew they liked the chase. Running was a bad idea. The dogs crossed the boundary of their driveway and slowed almost to a calculated crawl, shoulder blades dipping up and down their raised hackles. Air hissed through their noses, and they licked their tongues through exposed teeth. The gums were white. Damsel barked out a high-pitched wail. I froze and held my breath. The German Shepherd took the lead, cueing the pit bull and mutt to drift into a wider circle, flanking the leader but coming up to each side of us. Stop, I begged. Leave us alone, please. The German Shepherd lunged at Damsel's neck. Damsel scrambled back, her nails scraping the asphalt. The shepherd's jaws snapped the air. Damsel cried and howled and twisted her neck at a weird angle to avoid the bite. The shepherd barked 3 times in rapid succession like gunfire, and the other dogs joined in. They reminded me of the girls from St. Mary's, how they warmed up by crowding me during lunch, how they sang stupid, 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 like some chorus to a popular song. I screamed and pulled on the leash. Please leave us alone. It occurred to me no one was going to save us. No matter how loud they were, the dogs had trained the neighborhood to tolerate it. They barked at night and during the day. They barked when the coyotes howled and their neighbor's loud Ford rumbled up their driveway. I sometimes listened to them when they woke me up in the middle of the night. What could they possibly be saying, launching their exclamations off into the world like a flurry of grenades? What the hell do they want? What war could they possibly be fighting all day and all night? The mutt and the pit bull pulled further from rank and flanked Damsel on either side. Their front paws hopped off the ground with each bark. Damsel lowered her head in submission and whined, avoiding eye contact. The dogs kept their eyes on Damsel. Her body crouched and stiff, the leash slack. They barked and lunged inches from her body, only to draw back and do it again. The dogs must be trained in some manner to leave people alone, I realized. A violent bridge they were forbidden to cross. I was just a spectator to them, a witness to this ritual of noise and saliva and fang. There'd be blood, but not mine. This wasn't about me. I could have run and offered up Damsel like a sacrificial offering. Instead, I crept forward towards my dog, gathering the slack on her leash until I reached her back end, tail tucked and legs shaking. The dogs were still barking at her, still ignoring me. I wrapped the leash around my arm and hand and pulled Damsel to the side of me. I stepped forward so her ear pressed to my side. The pit bull and mutt noticed the dynamic had changed somehow and drifted back behind their leader, wanting to follow its orders. Back off, I said, my voice now a deep, commanding baritone. My dog, go away, mine. They barked back. Our country driveway, like most on our block, was long, at least 20 yards. I knew if I turned, my power would be gone. So I inched backwards, keeping Damsel with me. The leash burned as it wrapped around my hand. They crept as we did, about a foot away, maintaining their distance, but coming no closer. As loud as they were, they seemed to get louder and louder the closer we got to our gate. Go back, back off, I hollered. They paced us inch by inch towards my fence, holding the distance close but never reaching closer. Then, as I fumbled behind me for the latch on my gate, my eyes never turning away, an invisible leash finally pulled them back. The dogs, once poised low and snarling, were now jumping and barking in place. Bad dog, go home. Finally, I felt the latch lift. As if that was some kind of cue, they turned and trotted off. I pulled Damsel into the yard and closed the gate. I crouched down and put my arms around her neck. She seemed tired, maybe winded from me pulling her so tightly, because she sat obediently, lightly resting her nose on my collarbone. Poor damsel. You're okay, girl. You're safe now. Mom came out to the porch, leaned in the doorway, and folded her arms. What the fuck was all that noise about?
I like the way you changed the ending.
Thank you.
Was that as part of the exercise you changed it, or did you have another reason for changing it?
That was part of the reason for changing it, was because I didn't feel like I had a disaster.
Uh-huh.
I broke one of his rules. I don't think I answered the story goal. Oh, no, I did. I did.
Well, what was your goal? Let's go back to that.
The goal, and it has to be announced in the scene,
Uh-huh.
was, come on, girl, just ignore them. Let's go.
So then the question for the reader would be, does damsel ignore the dogs?
Oh, shit. No, I thought it meant we're going to go for a walk. Like we were going to go walk down the block. But instead, we were not. Like, come on, girl, just ignore them. Let's go means let's go for a walk. And we never did get to go on our walk.
You see, I got the idea there that you'd already seen the dogs and you wanted damsel to ignore them so that you could keep going.
Oh, so where do I announce the story goal?
Okay, so you're saying, come on, girl, just ignore them. Let's go. So basically, you're trying to walk past them.
Yeah, I thought that was the goal of the scene goal. Go for a walk.
That definitely is a no, because you don't get out of your driveway. You barely get out of your driveway before you back up. Is the conflict then about you trying to go for a walk and not being able to?
Well, I guess, oh gosh, it's complicated. So the main conflict is I just don't want to get eaten, or I don't want to get hurt. And I don't want my dog to get hurt.
Right. And that one comes clear in. Question I was asking myself throughout the scene is Renee and her dog going to be okay?
So the story question is not, will they go on their walk? The story question is, will Renee and her dog be okay?
Right. So the stated goal would be something like, ignore them, damsel, I'll protect you. So the question then would be, can Renee protect damsel from the dogs?
Well, that's the other one, which is the metaphorical one, or the one in the background. The background goal, not that Bickham talks about this, but the one I have in my head is that I take ownership of the dog. Like the whole time before this scene, I'm like, I don't like this dog. I don't want a dog. Stupid dog. I don't even know how to train a dog. I didn't want this dog. But in this scene, I finally decide, no, this is my dog and I'm going to protect this dog. I could have just ditched her, but I decided to she's mine.
And you had that line there when you realize the other dogs won't attack you. So that works. Bickham's keen about the stating the goal. That's something I tried to do too, or to at least mentally state the goal for my piece. But it's so clear when you have these dogs barking at you and damsel that the question is, are you guys going to make it out? Even though the goal that you stated didn't quite fit, I knew what the goal was. I had that question going through the scene. Are Renee and the dog going to be okay?
Okay. Listeners, you can always chime in on our website. Like, do you think that the goal needs to be stated explicitly? Or is there enough information that it has been implied?
But when you were writing this, even though you'd stated the goal, like ignore them, are Renee and her dog going to go for a walk? You wrote the actual conflicts like, are Renee and her dog going to be okay?
Right. I put in the dialogue because I was like, oh, I didn't state the story goal. And I was even confused. I was like, I don't even know what the story goal is. And I just said, oh, well, we're trying to go for a walk. So did we go for a walk? No, but I guess that was not the story goal, but I guess there's one in there. So that's good.
Yeah. I actually noticed you put quite a bit more dialogue in here.
So I was inspired by the appendices.
Okay.
So each chapter comes with an appendices, which has an example and an analysis. When I was revising this, I had the chapter open and I was looking at the example that he gave. And his example had a lot more dialogue in it. I really took to heart, like, I need to state goals here. I need to make the conflict visible. I should put some dialogue in. So that's why I put the dialogue in. Did you like the dialogue?
I did. It wouldn't have worked if you didn't have damsel with you, or if they weren't active dogs that were barking at you. I thought it made perfect sense for you to be talking to the dogs, talking to Damsel and talking to these dogs that were menacing you guys. It didn't feel like a one-way dialogue. Sometimes people have their characters talking to themselves aloud just because they need some active voice in the story, but this fit perfectly.
Yay.
I never once questioned why you were speaking aloud. The other one I loved was I loved the example you gave of what the girls at the school did to you, because that just said it all right there.
I described bullying issues in this chapter. My mom, she didn't really protect me, and I was trying to make that clear, like, okay, now I'm helping Damsel. I'm doing what my mom should be doing for me, but I'm going to choose to do it for Damsel. That was inspired by you in the last episode of the Patreon. That revision, you said, oh, this needs to be more clear because we're not seeing this. So I put that in there about the girls because of you.
It's all about having your audience see stuff. So why don't you just talk me through here, and you can identify some of the micro conflicts. Because Bickham says that, an argument doesn't work if people keep saying the same thing over and over again. It has to evolve. So if you think about your confrontation with these dogs as an argument, do you have any evolutions of that argument that you can see in your piece?
I think so. It's almost like the dialogue is what triggers the evolution. So the first one is I'm a victim and I beg. I'm like, stop, leave us alone, please. Like I'm begging. I'm not being very powerful, right? And these dogs are attacking us, and I'm kind of doing what I do when I got bullied.
Right.
And I did it again, actually. I said it again.
Yeah. Please leave us alone.
If I had done it a third time, I think Bickham would have been like, hey, this argument is not evolving. Your conflict is not evolving. No one is changing. The dogs are advancing, but nothing's happening. The next piece of dialogue makes it evolve, where I then say, back off. My dog, go away, mine. And so that one is like, all right, I have decided that I'm not going to be a victim here. I'm in charge. Like I'm standing above them. I'm looking down on them. I notice things like they're not paying attention to me per se. They just want to attack Damsel. And so I use that to my advantage. That evolved. Like I went from victim to the dreaded human in the relationship between dogs and humans.
And I see that. I think you did a really good job of showing how you were evolving the argument all the way through. I'm not sure if you had the dogs responding to how you changed the argument. So it makes sense. The first one, stop, I begged, please leave us alone, and they don't stop. The second one is, please leave us alone. And this is the point where you make the realization that the dogs aren't after you, they're after Damsel. If Bickham were looking at it, he'd say, okay, you've made that realization. It just occurs in your head. It isn't actually shown in what the dogs are doing. So they're still focused on you. And then the third time you say, my dog, go away, mine, they barked back. See, they're still just kind of responding the same way. So if you had them take a step back, but still growl, that would be evolving the argument, right?
Yeah, that would make the argument evolve better. Like I've changed, but I need to get a reaction out of the dogs. There is, I think, a bit of an evolution, but it's not stated out loud. It's like description. So when I crept forward and I started pulling the leash and like getting closer to Damsel, that we were side by side, the pit bull and the mutt noticed the dynamic had changed somehow and drifted back behind their leader, wanting to follow its orders. I think that is a reaction to what I had done.
Right. So that part of the argument isn't prefaced by your speaking, but when does that happen?
So that happens like I decide, oh crap, they're not looking at me. I need to protect my dog. And instead of cowering away, I actually walk up and stand next to Damsel, like I'm approaching the dogs.
All right.
And then after that, the two dogs that were flanking us were like, oh, this is different. And then they moved back.
Okay. Let's see here. So I realized it was a violent bridge they were forbidden to cross. So this point is an internal realization.
Mm-hmm.
What Bickham would say is there has to be some external thing, some noticing the way the dogs are reacting that would click in your brain to respond to that. And then once you notice that, this is stimulus and response. So you're noticing that they're focusing on damsel would have the response that you would creep forward towards your dog.
Mm.
And then that's your next stage of your argument, which isn't signaled by you saying anything, but by your motion. Then the argument changes. One thing that makes this tricky is that the dogs aren't that nuanced in their responses. Like this isn't a back and forth conversation where the turn of your word would result in a look of the other person's comprehension and therefore an evolution of the argument. You know, these are dogs and they're very straightforward.
Yeah, I'm pretty limited. It was a scene of dogs and they're just barking and they're snarling. I could maybe add some things to make it different. Or is it okay that they're just...
You're not writing fantasy. You're not writing a story about getting into a dog's head. You're writing about a reaction to a couple of bully dogs that you had. And this whole chapter's bigger point is the bullying that you experienced and the way you evolved to view that bullying. So I don't think it would make sense to put that much mind into the dogs that you're facing down.
So then it's okay.
But that being said, I think it would be really useful for you to change the dog's behavior just a little bit as they go along, and also to change the argument with the dogs that there's a change right then. And I think it works. I wrapped the leash around my arm and hand and pulled damsel to the side of me. I stepped forward so her ear was pressing my side. Then you have the pit bull and mutt noticed the dynamic had changed. Okay, so here's your stimulus and response. You have you and damsel standing next to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the pit bull and mutt's response. And then you have the internalization about why they're acting that way.
Oh, so I should move the internalization?
Yep, you should move it up to the front right after that, where the dynamic had changed. And then we had the pit bull and the mutt drifted back.
Mm.
You really need to use the stimulus and response we talked about before to make sure that people can follow where the argument is going or how the argument is evolving.
So I worry about moving this paragraph, because the one about the internalization, because for me to make the decision to actually approach the dogs and get my dog, I had to have a reason why I did that. And the reason was an internalization that happened before that scene. If I put it afterwards, they would be in the wrong order.
So the internalization, the dogs must be trained in some manner to leave people alone, I realized. That's the realization.
Right.
And then when you pull a damsel to your side and you're standing side by side, then what you're doing is making the dogs consider both of you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the earlier statement about your realization about the way the dogs are trained is fine where it is. I think that you just need to be a bit more explicit to your audience that when you and damsel stand side by side, that the dynamic changes. Because here's the thing. In your head, you had figured it out. But the critical thing at that point is the pit bull and the mutt figuring it out.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to explicitly state the united front you and damsel are putting up to explain why the pit bull and the mutt backed down.
Smart. Yes. I will add that in. If you can't hear the little ticking noise in the background, that is me typing these wonderful notes I'm getting. Excellent.
It has to be tight. You just need to go over these again and again with each revision and then check and make sure that in fixing the argument or putting these other things in that you haven't lost your stimulus and responses.
This is hard stuff for me. It was very exhausting. I kept forgetting, like, wait, what comes first? What comes next? I felt like I was juggling. It made me really nervous. And I think part of it is just anxiety that I carry over from just learning, the learning process. When I'm learning something new, sometimes I hit a little panic mode. My brain thinks, I'm never going to understand this. And of course I will, but there's some stress there. And so I was kind of experiencing that today.
When people listen to the Patreon episode, they can hear all the problems I had because, man, this was not an easy exercise for me either.
It's funny because he makes it seem so easy. It's like bullet pointed, do this and this and this. It's 3 steps. And then you start doing it. And then you're like, oh my God.
Well, is Fred going to get the loan or is he not? That's the issue with having such a simple example. Is it's pretty obvious what the goal is and what the goal fail is and what the antagonist is going to try to do.
It's not easy. Dear listener, this is not as easy as you think.
So with the goal being, is Renee going to make it home? And Dab's going to make it home okay. It looks like the answer to that question is yes, they make it home.
Yes, and that was a problem because it was a yes. It wasn't a yes, but it was just a yes. It has to end in some disaster. A yes, but, or a no, and. And it couldn't be a no, and because I made it. So I put my mom in there, which might be breaking the rules, but I did it anyway. Because what happens now? The dogs are gone. I mean, I could allude to some idea that, well, the dogs are always going to kind of be there.
I liked the ending.
You thought it was okay?
Yeah, because it immediately bumps me into what the next scene is.
Nice.
Or what further things are happening to Renee. So for a let's make people want to turn the page ending, that's a make people want to turn the page.
Yay. Yeah, I figured at the end there was like, what the fuck was all that noise about? That is something my mom would have said. After all that had happened, it's kind of like, oh, she wouldn't have protected me. I mean, maybe from dogs, I don't know, but she's still like blaming me. I'm always going to be in trouble or whatever.
Well, that's the bigger picture of the question of this chapter is like, how is Renee going to respond to bullies? How is Renee going to respond to conflict? So in that case, in the bigger scheme of things, bringing your mother into the scene and showing that this is the conflict that isn't settled does make it a yes, but.
Success.
Good
Kapla.
job, Renee. I give you permission to be done with the scene for our next exercise.
Oh, yes, that would be wonderful. Wonderful. You know, I've read the original out loud in the Patreon. Do you think Bickhamizing it has made it better than the original?
Your first change to expand on the stimulus and response made it a much more engaging scene because you turned it into an action scene as opposed to just the memory of this time I was scared by dogs. And that was a big improvement. And here you cut out a lot of the internalization. You just got it to the scene. Yeah, I think this works really well as far as an engaging action scene in your book.
So this is good. It doesn't just organize things so you don't confuse readers. Bickhamizing your scenes can really help develop them and make them more engaging.
Yes. You have to decide if this is the style you want to write it. There are things the other versions did with your internalizations and that getting into Renee's head that this one doesn't do. But then maybe you do that in other parts of the chapter. I don't know.
There would be plenty of that earlier in the chapter. The chapter piles on all of this baggage. And then in that scene that I just read, we're bringing all that baggage into that scene. So the metaphor, I think, is really clear by then. There's plenty of room for internalization earlier on.
Oh, good. Okay. So my scene we'll cover in the Patreon bonus episode. And I always tell Renee, tell us about Patreon, but I guess I'll take it this time, which is on Patreon, or say in no, never mind. Renee, you do so much a better job. Renee, tell us about Patreon.
Let me tell you about Patreon, dear listener. So on Patreon, we got bonus episodes, and you'll get the bonus episode of Kim reading her work and Bickhamizing her scene. We've got chapter summaries that we call snark notes because they're chapter summaries, but they're snarkier and more fun and way more interesting than regular old chapter summaries. You also get to do the activities So if you join the Pinto tier, you get to do the exact same activity we just did, and you can post your results on Patreon. And the first 3 that post, we will respond to. And just a second pitch here. And you can sign up for our newsletter on the website. And if you do, you will get a free chapter notes, snark notes of John Gardner's Common Errors, which is our most popular chapter summary.
Yes, so we are trying to grow our mailing list because Renee has imbibed a whole bunch of marketing mojo and she's gonna play it out. And your newsletters are getting pretty cool. So worth signing up for. And that way you know when we post an episode or we post a bonus podcast.
Or post a recipe.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.
See you then.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.